In this video, we're going to discuss creating doctrine repositories in Symfony. So let's start off by creating a Symfony 4 application. I'm basically just going to call my project entities because this is everything is revolved around entities. If you are not sure how to install Doctrine, not Doctrine, but Symfony, I do have another video that goes over details on installing Symfony. Okay, so Symfony has now been installed. I did pause it, so it typically takes a little bit longer than that. The first thing you're going to do is we're going to go ahead and set up our database. I'm not going to go over creating a database, but you would modify your .env file and then add your credentials. However, when you do modify your environment file, you're going to make the changes to your database URL. You're going to assign your database user the password. Your connection typically changes to localhost if you're running on a server, and then the database name. Once you save those, then you'll have a connection to your database. Okay, so now that we've got our database connection set up, let's go ahead and create a basic view and controller. By default, Symfony 4 will not come with any. Alright, so let's create a controller. I've got my project up. I like to use Sublime. There's a lot of different IDEs out there. It's just Sublime is one of my favorites. So in your source directory, and then go into your controller directory, create a new file, and we're going to call it, you can call it anything you want, but I'm going to call mine home controller. And then we're just going to copy and paste, just standard code. So here, you add your namespace, add your use statements. Your class is going to be home controller. The class name will always be the same name as the file. This is pretty much standard for everything in Symfony. Here I've got a basic route set up. I go to the name home, and here is my public function home action. It's best practice to to use different names inside your function and then follow it by action. And then here we're just going to render it to a simple HTML file. Then go into your templates directory, create a new folder to match the folder that you've told it. So we're going to create a folder called home. And then we're going to create a new file. I'm going to call it index.html.twig. So in your twig file, go ahead and extend your base. And then you just need to make sure that you have the tags that are inside your base. And here we're just going to put a simple welcome. Now you have a template. Well, it's not really a template, but you have a output in Twig. And then if we open up a web browser, then we'll see that the site is responsive. There's my welcome screen, and I have the Symfony toolbar loaded, and we're good to go. Alright, so let's get started. So the purpose of this video is to show you entities. I do have another video that goes over entities, so we're not going to touch bases on that very long. What we're going to really touch bases is the repository, and I'm finding that there's just not a lot out there that really fully explains the repository. I think as you as you go through, you kind of figure it out. And once you see the light, it's not really that difficult. All right, so let's go into your entity directory, which is going to be in your source, and you go ahead and add a new file. And I'm just going to call this customers. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add our basic entity. So you start off with your namespace, and then add in your ORM. You really don't need the indexing, but I just like to include it just in case I add indexing, so that way it's already there. But a lot of people will just remove this. So I'm showing this here just so you see it, but I'm just going to go ahead and remove it because I'm not going to index anything in this one. And then we're going to add our annotations. Now we're going to go back and modify this after as well. Okay, so I added an ORM entity and an ORM table, and I'm giving it the name table. So now let's go ahead and define our class. Remember, the class name is going to be the same as the file name. Now let's go ahead and define our auto increment value. This is pretty much standard for every entity that I create. I basically just copy and paste it, but here you're telling it it's the ID, it's going to be an auto increment value, and the column type is integer. Now here I've given it the name. Now if I want to give this a different name, like for example I might want to say customer ID. In this case, if you have the lowercase uppercase, what Doctrine is going to do to your database is going to write it as this. But if you don't want it to be like that and you want it to be like this in your database, then simply add another value, and we're going to call it name equals customer ID. And that way this will get written to the database exactly how you want it. This is useful for if you're working on importing a legacy application, you're upgrading another application that already has a database, and then you're going to incorporate that, or you're going to import that data, not import the database, but import the data. Then this would be very useful. But if you don't care what the columns are named, then there's really no need for the name equals. So unless you have a specific purpose on the reason why you want them to be named a certain way, then that's the way of doing it. Alright, so let's add a couple more fields. We're not going to add too many. So here I'm going to add the first name. It's a string. I'm giving it the name of first. Again, you don't have to put this in here if you don't want to, because I've already got it here. And then I'm setting it to be nullable. That's up to you if you want to set it to be nullable or not. And let's go ahead and add the last name. And then let's add an address. We'll just add one more. I'm not going to worry about the country. Alright, so we have all these fields, and they're all just strings. You can do date, you can do float, you can do there's just a whole bunch of different types you can use. And they all interact differently. But we're just doing something simple. Now the last part is you need to generate your getters and setters. Some of you might not know exactly what a getter and a setter is. You've got these values that are all protected values, and they're inside a class. So when you go to access these values from another class, it's not going to allow you because these are protected inside this class. So what a getter and a setter does, it's your mediation layer. The getter and the setter will allow access to these values through the getter and the setter. So if that makes sense. There's a plugin that I use in Sublime for generating getters and setters. It's really easy to find. Just Google it. So I'm just going to go ahead and generate those. And I'm just going to generate all. Alright, so this has created all of my getters and setters. Now, I will say one thing. When I generate all, there's no need for the set customer ID because this is an auto increment field. So I'm going to remove this set customer ID because there's no need to set the customer ID because MySQL is going to handle that for me. And if you don't have the plugin, if you have to do this manually, then here it is. All right, so now that we've created our entity, let's go ahead and push that out to the database. So what we're going to do is we're going to use doctrine migrations to handle that. So you're first going to run doctrine migrations diff, and this will take a snapshot of all of the changes from the last time you ran doctrine migrations, and then we're going to go ahead and migrate. Now, just an FYI, if you create tables inside your database manually, doing a migration, if the migration doesn't know about those tables, it will delete them. So keep that in mind. If you're gonna do migrations, then migrations have to handle your database, from start to end. If you're gonna manage it yourself, then do not run migrations and handle that manually. All right, so our table has been created. Now, if we pop up in PHP-MyAdmin, we can see that the customers table has been created. So here it made a first, last, address, city, state, and zip. Because I told it was string, everything is varchar 255. You can set the length, and it's just length equals, and then the number. No parentheses. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the repository. So it's important to have a working entity first because the repository is just going to build off of it. So here's where we're going to put it. In your ORM/entity, and you might have at package entity, don't get those two confused. I don't have it in mine, but if you use a generator, then it might add at package entity. So what we're going to do is on at ORM entity, we're going to make a link to your repository class. So here we're going to say repository class equals, and then you're going to put the location. So it's going to be app repository, and then the name is going to follow your entity. So our entity is customers, so it's going to be customers repository. So here I got app repository, customers repository. You can go ahead and save that file. Now we need to make this file. So go into your repository directory. If you don't have it, you can go ahead and create the folder. By default, it should be there in Symfony 4. And by the way, this works the same way in Symfony 3. So if you're still working on Symfony 3, the process is the same. The only thing that's different is your bundle name. So Symfony 4 default is app. Symfony 3 is app bundle. Alright, so now we're in our repository. So add your namespace, and then we're going to use doctrine ORM entity repository. And now we need to define your class. And again, it's going to be the same as your file name. So if you're not seeing that pattern, see it now. Every class has the same as the file name. The important thing is you're going to extend entity repository. So this is a basic repository. It's best practice to go ahead and create a repository for every entity that you create. Even if you don't use it, you'll have it there for future use. So we're going to just include a simple query. Alright, so here we're going to say public function, and I'm just going to call it test query. Now I do things a little different, but the way that Symfony shows it in their example, and I'm just going to basically paste from another project. So they show this in their example. I like to just have a little bit more organized. So I like to give it an SQL.
Sorry, I'm not sure.
Alright, so I define a very simple SQL statement. Select C from app : customers. App is your bundle. Customers is your entity. Now you notice that I didn't have to include my entity because it's already mapped, but you will have to use your entity in your controller when you go to access this repository. And then I'm just going to return a simple query. So here, and I just copy and pasted this, but this basically comes from Symfony's website. I'm going to give results, and then I'm going to assign it to Entity Manager, create query, and I'm going to pass in my SQL call right here, and then I'm going to pass it to get results. And then I'm going to return results, and this is basically a query. So this should return every value that's inside your customer's table in every entity that is defined. So this includes if you have many to one defined in your table, it'll do that for you as well. Now you can also take this another direction, and you can define what fields you want. If you don't want every field, then you can simply say, let's go ahead and do it this way. So let's say okay, so that stays the same. Now let's say, and we give it an alias. I forgot about that. We need to do that here as well. So let's say we want the first name and we want the last name, and that's all we want. Then now when we return the results, only the first and the last name will be returned. Now if say for example you wanted to pass a parameter, and say you wanted to return a specific customer ID, then you would basically pass that customer ID into your query, and then you can come in here and add a where statement, and then you add c.customer ID equals, and then we're going to say ID. Now this is going to be a parameter, so you'll have to pass a parameter. So the only addition that you'll have to do is in between the create query and get results, then you need to set parameter. I'm spelling it right. The name that you've given it here, and then the value that you're passing. So that's how you pass a parameter. And then, if you had another table, then, you can come in here and you can say left join app, and then let's say we had another table called addresses. And then you put your condition, C dot customer ID equals A dot customer ID. Now I don't have addresses created, so I would have to create that entity, create the database, create the different data, put the people in there. But this, the same thing, this is, just adding to the query. We're going to go ahead and remove that because we don't have that defined. And then we're going to go ahead and remove this as well. So let's, I'm just going to remove all this. So that gives you a basic idea on, the things you can do in Doctrine. Alright, so now we've got select C from customers, and then we have the alias C, and then that should pass all the data. You might have noticed that I spelled my class wrong, so I didn't add an S. And then let's just do a refresh and make sure there's no errors, and we've got no errors. So now let's build our query. So we're going to go to our controller now. And let's go ahead and include our entity. Alright, so inside our home action, let's just give a couple lines. So we're going to say $result, I like to say results, equals $this. Then we're going to say get doctrine. And then we're going to say get repository. Then we're going to indicate the name of our entity, which is customers. And then we're going to indicate it's a class. And then we're going to pass in our function. So if we go back to a repository, and we need to take this out too because we're not passing a parameter. So let's grab test query. Now that should hold all the data. So let's go ahead and pass this to Twig. And we're going to set it as an array. So here we got results is the variable I'm going to give it in Twig, and then I'm going to pass $results. And if we go back into our view, so let's go to our template. Inside here, let's just dump the data. If you haven't seen dump yet, this is a really nice troubleshooting tool for seeing what your data looks like. Now let's go back to the browser, do a refresh. And I haven't added any data, so we actually shouldn't see any, so that's the correct way. So let me add some data real fast. Alright, so in PHP-MyAdmin, we're just going to insert some data real fast. I'm going to pause it while I add just a couple more records. Okay, so I added some data manually through PHP-MyAdmin, so I added 2 records. So now if we go back to our Symfony application, now we've got 2 records. And there's all the data. And then if we want to, see that data inside Symfony, then let's go ahead and just make a quick little table. I don't have Bootstrap or anything in there, so this is just basic. Okay, so this is where we're going to loop our data. Alright, so we're going to do a loop in Twig. So you're basically going to set up a for D in results, so and then everything, then they're able to get expanded. And then go ahead and get the data out for each column. And then don't forget to the closure tag. So we're going to do an N4. And then close your table. And save your file. Then if you refresh, so now if you refresh, you'll see that we got an error, and that's because I spelled address wrong. Let's look at it again. So it's looking for address with 2 S's, but inside my entity, if I go back to my entity and I look at address, it's only got 1 S, so I spelled it wrong. So let's go ahead and fix that in our view. But what you typically do, well, let's correct it the right way. So let's because the name is addresses, so let's just go ahead and fix that. I shouldn't have to rerun the migration because the table in the database is address with 2 S's. So now we just fixed that, and then let's go and fix our getter and our setter. So let's fix that there. Alright, so that should be fixed. So if we refresh, we still got it in there, so let me look at it real quick. Well, for now, I just went ahead and I took the extra S out. But, in the future, there's probably a caching issue or somewhere in that nature. That's the reason for that. I did rerun the migration, but that didn't seem to affect anything. So I took the extra S out, and now we can see the data because it's still coming in. Well, now it's coming with both. So yeah, I think it's just a caching issue right now. So anyhow, as you see that, it's looped through the table and it's, presented everything. You can expand your queries. You can add queries to it. So as you're developing your application, just continue adding your additional queries in here. You can pass data and so forth. If you want to use KMP paginator, you can easily paginate inside your controller. So if I wanted to paginate, then I can go install the paginator bundle, which by the way, I have a tutorial on paginator as well. It's not too difficult. You just basically, once you have paginator installed, then you can paginate on results before you render it to your view. And that's pretty much it. And I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like and subscribe.